So welcome back, everybody. Well, just as we get going, so what my ask of each of the subspecialty captains or chairs is to, we'll take turns, go around maybe a couple of rounds like yesterday. Give us your number one and number two takeaway from today from your track. And then we'll open up quickly for a group discussion. And we have about 40 minutes, and amazing how fast these 40 minutes go always in this session. It's sort of like a roundup of all the great insights and ideas from the day today. So let's start. I'm just looking at my Zoom panel here. Let's start with Shervin, since you're here.
Yeah, I think it was a great discussion we had. We tried to stay focused on the complex discussion around real-time and AI. Definitely a lot of good thoughts and examples from Alfonso, Bill, and Eric. I think if I want to summarize, I think that we're really going back to some of the basics that may have been missing, in a lot of experiments, the basics being staying super close to the champions and leaders that are having a good understanding of the pain points, the current solutions, the need to switch and pivot, plus adapting to the current situation and the burden that COVID is bringing to us with financial burdens, and make sure that we're taking an agile approach in terms of iterative design of experiments, plus establishing the wins and impacts, and broadcasting and communicating those across the organization, so that the C-suite and key decision makers maintain and understand the value of the projects and the priority you're dealing with. So I think these are probably some of the bigger components that I think we can generalize for folks across the board. But certainly there are elements that need to be considered depending on size of the organization, the current pain points that might be different from one organization to another. So I'll stop there, and I can add more if we have more time later.
Yeah, I think the good news is that most surveys of C-suites are showing that they're ready to make an investment. I think the not so good news is that the budgets have all been cut, and we have to be bringing value proposition even more than before. So there's the good and the not so good. Thank you, Shervin. That was a good session. I listened into some parts of that.
Thank you.
Let's see, we can go to, we're waiting for Shafi to come on. Let's go to Payush, my friend. So what was your big takeaway from today as the chair of that track?
Yeah, actually it was...
representing the ICU, anesthesia, ER, and pulmonology sector. So you have four subspecialties. Okay.
Anthony, I'm going to echo what you said, that, year over year, this section by itself showed how things have progressed and matured. A lot of discussion, of course, with Matt Komrowski and a few others over there, was based on how to apply reinforcement learning and these advanced models. So that just shows the maturity. And as we know that the data sets that are available over there for development of these models, especially the open source ones led by Mimic and other data sets, have helped with proliferation of these model development and encourage research in these areas. And I was also thrilled to see, just with my personal bias with quality and patient safety, how much emphasis was being placed on quality and safety aspects while considering deployment of these models in ICU space, where these patients are very critically ill. Even small decisions can have a significant impact. So both the maturity of the models themselves and the approach itself, and the concern and trying to figure out the solutions to address those concerns for quality and safety aspects was very exciting to hear from different speakers.
Yeah, I think I remember just even a couple of years ago, we were talking about fairly straightforward machine learning in the ICU setting. But having said that, I think as we mature these models and capabilities, I think we do run into problems of having good data sets to learn from. So we're sort of outstretching our data supply in a way, which I know wasn't a discussion in many tracks, they're just data.
Well, it was also very exciting to not hear much about COVID or sepsis.
Okay. That's right. You're right. We haven't heard too much. Occasionally, not too much. Pratik, welcome, and one of the newest subspecialties to join our meetings. I'm so proud of gastroenterology to really benefit from this area. So, what was your takeaway?
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me okay, Anthony?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, congratulations once again, for putting this thing together. And as I skipped through different subspecialties, again, it was really cool to see what other stuff is happening in this field. So a number of things have been brought about already. So if you look at
If you're doing this virtually, you can do it faster than going around to different rooms physically.
Exactly. Which wouldn't have been possible in the live setting, but this allows you to.
That in January. We'll be doing that in January, hopefully. So.
Okay, looking forward to that. So besides common themes such as whether the impact of machine learning on quality metrics in gastroenterology, safety, EHR, I think something which is unique, not just to GI, but to other luminal specialties is computer vision. And so making smarter endoscopes, which can help us diagnose precancerous and cancerous lesions of the GI tract. And the last year, despite COVID, I think what's happened in the field of gastroenterology, specifically endoscopy, is a few RCTs being conducted in the field of computer vision and to look at detection of colon polyps and colon cancer during colonoscopy. And just at our center, we are right now in the midst of 3 different RCTs for the same program, with other RCTs in the pike for upper GI cancers. So that's what I think is something unique about gastroenterology. And we heard through yesterday and today, again, about early cancer detection, increasing our colon polyp detection, which, by the way, is also a quality metric. So it sort of lends into the whole quality issue. And so a number of use cases around gastric cancer, colon cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, finding dysplasia and cancer, in those settings were discussed. And, I think we're just starting off, but, the future is looking great for our field.
No, last year has been an explosion for you guys in gastroenterology. And I like the fact that you took on, real-time image analysis as your sort of your first area and teach the rest of us too. I think other subspecialties can learn from that, surgery, pulmonology, cardiology even. So I think that's a great domain for you to take on and really get interest amongst the gastroenterology.
And radiology obviously has led the field. So we are obviously a little bit learning from radiology, and sometimes we feel we are behind. But now, I think we're all learning from each other. But this field really will help, I think, all of us.
In a way, you kind of leapfrog because you went into real-time deep learning. So you kind of leapfrog even the radiologists. So congratulations on that. So Shafi, we were just trying to update everyone on your big 1 or 2 takeaways from surgery. I love the session that you guys had today. So I was popping in and out. And so what was your impression from today?
Hi, Anthony. Good to see you again, and everybody else. What a lovely conference. Thanks for the invitation to chair the surgery session, Anthony. So look, I think surgery is vibrant, I think is the word I would use, in AI and deep machine learning. Obviously, we have a lot of good data sets that we haven't used before, i.e. video, laparoscopic, arthroscopic surgery, whatever it is. We have huge amounts of data in video content, which lends itself well to computer vision and looking at mapping, navigation tools during the operation intraoperatively. So I think that's one key area. Well, of course, I think one of our speakers talked about laparoscopic cholecystectomy a simple operation, straightforward, very common, yet can be very hazardous in the wrong hands, or in fact can be dangerous. So how do you use that just to make that operation a lot easier? How do you help the surgeon augment his practice? So that's one thing I learned. Second, I think I've learned is around, I guess, the data we're capturing. Can we personalize surgical outcomes better? For years and decades, we've been using crude metrics, Anthony, in terms of 30-day mortality rate, morbidity from operations, which are very loose measures of performance. So going back now, looking at risk analysis, looking at benefits, we have to go back and look at real-time analysis of how the surgery is performing, looking at real data points, and looking at how the outcome surgery could be improved. So I think that's the key, and we're doing lots of trials now, lots of data out there. Of course, you've seen the world of digital surgery, the new concept. We've had digital health for such a long time as a common ground for all of us in the last 10 years. Suddenly, last 2 or 3 years, we've seen the concept of digital surgery. So I think we, as you know, as a specialty, we have robots being used for the last 20 years with Intuitive Surgical, and others are coming to market like CMR and others. And suddenly we're getting robots, we're using AI, computer vision. So that whole concept of personalizing surgical performance and outcome to improve the standards, I think is the key measure here. So it's a really exciting time to be alive as a surgeon. Sadly, I'm at the other end of my career, Anthony. I won't be able to experience all of it. So I can only cheer on from afar of all the people that are doing great work in this area.
We want to keep you on the field for a long time, Shafi. So are you seeing activity like in cardiology of actually doing procedures or 3D rendered MRI and sort of like go through a rehearsal in that's very individual to the patient, or are you not quite seeing that yet?
Is that for me, Anthony?
Yes, Shafi, because
sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. So one thing also we discussed earlier on the workshop we had was around, so AI is great, but also it's in context with augmented reality, etc. What we're seeing also is this kind of explosion of AR being used in the operating theatre. There's about 3 or 4 companies with FDA approval using AR devices, mapping MRI, CTs in real time, overlaying information. And of course, that's going to be beneficial. So if you imagine planning, pre-planning, interoperative mapping and navigation, plus AI, I think you're seeing a real new kind of environment, if you like, of the operating theatre. So the operating theatre is almost redesigned and rethought and reimagined as to what the possibilities are. And that's exciting. And I think we're at the forefront of that, I think, compared to most specialties. So I look at AI as one component of other technologies that surround it. It's not just on its own, it's how to use all the other stuff around it to enable AI to be used better.
Maybe the world's next great heart surgeon is a 14-year-old sitting in the basement somewhere.
Maybe.
Covered, right? Emre, so proud of also OBGYN for it's such a data-rich subspecialty, given all the monitoring you do for such an important event, the birth, and then everything else you do. It's like really well designed to take on some AI areas. And congratulations being more active also as a subspecialty. What did you gather from today's discussions?
Well, thank you, Anthony. First of all, I really need to thank you for, this is really the first time I'm seeing women's health being given equal footing in a data science type of, audience, right? And for me, that's the big takeaway, is that it's really, the field has been ignored. I know I keep repeating that, but it really has been. Women's health has been neglected, and we've been passed over in all kinds of data-driven projects. So I really appreciate the interest you took in making sure that we're included and you giving us a seat at the table. It's very developmental for us, but as you noticed and as you mentioned, there's just so many data streams, and there's so much overlap with radiology, with intensive care, with minimally invasive surgery, with medicine, with endocrinology, inpatient, outpatient, benign, malignant. I mean, the field is wide open for anybody who has an interest and a willingness to invest some time. Something that I've noticed, which is, funny, I actually think that AI, let's specifically the data science project I presented, the interpretation of fetal heart rate monitoring, right?
Right.
What I've noticed is that humans act like robots in a way. Like when people are reviewing those strips, they forget what the point is, right? So they're so focused on, is this a late decel? Is it a variable decel? What's the NICHD criteria? So they basically start developing pattern recognition heuristics. Meanwhile, like what you need as a human is an understanding of the underlying physiology and a clinical assessment of, is this baby at risk or not, based on my whole understanding of her clinical picture, right? Instead, you have nurses who call an attending at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, your patient's having late decels, I'm worried about the tracing. Well, what the hell does that mean? You know what I mean? And like, well, why do I need you to tell me that? You know, I need you to interpret the data, right? So in a crazy way, bringing AI into the system may actually be better even than the human interpretation, because you kind of train the system that physiologically, this is what I'm worried about. This is how this manifests in the tracing, and help me identify that. You know, and I really believe that individual practitioners lose sight of that, and it's amazing how quickly they do. You know,
no, I love that insight.
Pattern recognition.
That from fatigue or just seeing too much data, you know, I love that saying. We need to take the robot out of the human, the clinician. And it takes a robot, I guess, to take the robot out of the clinician. So I do think, I certainly agree with that. I see a lot of halters, and Terry, who's about to speak, probably see a lot of EEGs. We have bad days not picking up things that we should be picking up. And wouldn't it be nice to have the robot be our backup partner for those settings? So which brings to, so I love the fact that whatever we learn from each of these subspecialties, we can kind of transfer to another subspecialty. And it may sound like a brilliant idea in your subspecialty, just taking another idea from another subspecialty. And I love that. Terry, I know I'm almost envious of neurologists these days, because I feel like I'm reading more about neurosciences than even cardiology. So, and Terry is actually a bona fide AI expert as well. He's an engineer, he teaches machine learning. So you must be really happy these days about how AI has progressed and where it's going. So what did you gather from today?
Well, I mean, I'd like to point out that this is AI is finally giving back to the brain the things that it was originally inspired by. So we had in our session, it was moderated by Leila Entizam and Ali Abayazed and Matt Maros, both spoke from the radiology point of view. And they both emphasized that what happens a lot in radiology is there's multimodal imaging with many, many variables that are in some ways too much for the human eye to see, and that the AI programs can do this, so they can be used for tumor detection, segmentation, characterization, and can really improve the neuroimaging workflow. And it was very much this discussion of the software, the technology as an assistant, or somebody put a fellow in a box. And I think this is really the substitution for the repetitive, uninteresting tasks, but also the tasks that potentially are such high dimensionality that it's somewhat difficult for our own eyes to work with those. There was no sense that radiologists would be replaced by artificial intelligence, because the comment was made that AI is currently very, very narrow and can only do a small number of tasks, but it can be an essential partner in dealing with the increasing workflow demands of that modern medicine has, and it can improve reliability and throughput. So
like cardiology, neurology also has to deal with a lot of biomedical signals, and there's some signals in the noise that we sometimes miss. So as a neurologist, where do you see are the 2 or 3 main areas that you think an AI tool can help you with clinically?
I think that it's already happening in the sense of, you mentioned reading EEGs. EEGs are hours of boredom and moments of excitement. And so being able to identify areas of interest. And that would also be true on imaging. And I think this multimodal imaging is very much, as we get more and more modes on the MRI, and an MRI scan is a multi-layered, sort of multispectral image, being able to combine those for the things, we look at one image at a time for very specific things, but being able to actually combine those and have sort of the colorized images and things that really give us a very different kind of viewpoint. So I think a lot of it is going to be calling attention to salient events. This was the use of amplitude integrated EEG in the neonatal intensive care units has been very, very essential to that. And again, as we have more and more sort of automated interpretation of ongoing data that is too volume heavy, and too repetitive for humans to do effectively without tiring or missing things. So I think there's a lot of it is going to be in management and in this assistance. Humans are always going to be better signal processors than any machine can ever be. But machines can do the simple signal processing tasks much faster on much larger data sets. So in that way, I think neurology really shares the same opportunities for AI that many of us have been talking about from other fields as well.
Yeah, I think that was a point raised yesterday, that sometimes we're shooting for these really amazing AI-like projects with deep reinforcement learning, but I think the much bigger dividend is actually just raising everyone's game in the simple, mundane things, and not do something that, as they say, human stupidity can be neutralized with artificial intelligence in some ways. So to raise everyone's game and awareness, right? So I think there was I don't know if all of you saw the MIT Future Computing seminar. They're talking about now being able to embed neural nets, simple neural nets, into microprocessors. This is what MIT engineers are capable of doing, which means a lot of our devices, and particularly you'll be happy to hear that they'll actually have built-in algorithms so that by the time it filters to you, it's already pretty much analyzed. So that, wouldn't that be amazing? Instead of I feel like I get a lot of false positives right now for atrial fibrillation, even in pediatric patients, which is almost unheard of because it's just the false positivity rate is too high. I feel like I'm the mechanical Turk looking at all the signals, trying to make sense out of the AI-derived algorithm for atrial fibrillation. So it'd be nice if it's.
And Anthony, already, we have the LiDAR scanner built in, right? So I mean, size is now almost virtually available to everyone in their pockets, right? And one of the things in luminal GI, what you deal with is measuring tumor size and polyp size or ulcer size, and I think going to Terry's point, I mean, even in radiology, whether it's a stroke in neurology or, a lesion that you're seeing in the brain, I mean, you want to measure the size, and we're so focused on that. And those are the mundane things which can easily be taken away by the computer that we don't have to struggle with and try to put our scales and figure that out. So you're absolutely right, Anthony. I mean, those things are here, and as it progresses, a number of those things will be in our smartphones.
Yeah, I think until the devices get smarter, it's going to be a little bit painful for the clinicians trying to make up that gap. The other big theme that came out, as usual, on the very first meeting 5 years ago, has been where do we get high quality data that's well curated, accurate as to train. And I think every subspecialty just about talked about that in their sessions. So anyone want to comment on data sets in their subspecialty?
Well,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sure,
yeah, I think on our side, again, I'm working with Providence and Joseph, so I'm talking about a very large fragmented enterprise. And I think that's still a major pain point for us with the 50 hospitals and 1,000 clinics. And data governance is tied to that as well. That is a fundamental work that needs to be done. We are working on it, but I still see that, being a pain point, at least for the next year or two. We had a good discussion with Bill and also on things that may not be the same level of a pain point for smaller entities, and this could be one of those areas. But it could be also the different, if the data infrastructure is not ready for super small clinics that they have to now get information for multiple repositories. The data validation is another element that most data scientists know that they have to spend a lot of time and to build the right model. And I see at least a good amount of examples and use cases that are not putting a good amount of effort or the real amount of effort on that. And that's why it may impact the confidence we have on those models and predictions. But I think that's where we see things, at least in my view.
Well, there may be a partial solution. That was just, if you can see the MIT Tech Review top 10 technology this year. And one of them is on the concept of data trusts, and they address specifically healthcare. So I think, maybe we're too busy and we're just too fragmented to do this. Maybe there needs to be some central way of doing this. and we've all kind of had trustees that will look after the data, obviously with the patient's priorities in place also. But I think, we need some help in that area, because that is kind of, as I say, decelerating the velocity for AI projects in general. And, most of us spend a lot of time doing, first of all, just getting access to data and agreeing to have data. And that needs to be, I think, improved, that process of getting that improved and make it frictionless, right? How wonderful would it be just to have data sets to work with? It's almost unheard of that you have a data set that's so good that you can work on it right away. So a lot of discussion was about data, quality of data, getting access to data, getting data that people can agree with, that doesn't allow the model to fatigue prematurely especially when you go outside of your institution. Another point that's come up with, I think this is a decade that hopefully a lot of clinicians will get into this domain and be much more actively involved as a group. I always say that not knowing programming should not be a deal breaker to get into this. And I think there's still the perception out there amongst clinicians that you have to program to be doing AI projects in medicine. And it's, I think the clinician wisdom and insight is actually even more needed than data science support, although it's a close second. But not having enough clinicians work with is really troubling a lot of the data science groups that I talk to. Truly work with, side by side, not an occasional, monthly meeting about how the projects are going. So how do we, in your subspecialties, how are you noticing adoption, and how is the process taking place? I always half-jokingly say that when I have the privilege of giving a talk for a subspecialty, I can gauge the level of interest or adoption by the size of the room that I'm speaking in. So sometimes it's a little breakout room, other times it's a ballroom. So I know you kind of have a good feel for the subspecialty, but how are you increasing adoption, or at least interest, in your respective subspecialties?
Anthony, I can talk about it for critical care, for example. So for SCCM, both Robert and myself, we actually formed something that is called a knowledge education group, which is an open group for the entire society. Typically, what you find in societies are these sections or these committees or so. Whereas when you have open groups that anybody can join, that fosters this kind of collaborative work. But I think to your point, the basic that clinicians need to understand is reading some of the publications, understanding the basic terms and terminology. And that is what we have to promote, so that people understand what is the quality of that research, what does it mean, and interpret it. And I applaud you, and if I might put in a plug for the ABAIM board that has been formed, and their course and their review, which cuts across all specialties. It doesn't matter which specialty you belong to, but it levels the basic understanding of these terms, the models, and other things, so that you can start with that collaboration.
I think one key skill would be for clinicians to appreciate the nuances as well as the validity of projects in this area. And I don't know if any of you saw this, but it was very sobering that I think a publication came out last week or 2 weeks ago, that apparently none of the many COVID papers had any clinical relevance for clinicians. I'm not talking about like 10, 20%, 0 out of thousands of papers now this group was a little bit harsh in the criticism, I have to say, out of Oxford, but they claimed that none of the papers had any clinical relevance. In a way, I mean, if you're a clinician, you don't always rely on chest x-ray to make the diagnosis, but still, it was very deflating for, I think, a lot of people. So I think all the more reason we need to work very closely with clinicians, not just kind of go off on a data science project without enough input from clinicians. So, but it was very sobering that 0 out of a few thousand papers they looked at had any clinical relevance, in their opinion, of course. So hope that we don't run into that with all of we champions here, that we have clinical relevance kind of built in, right, in our projects, hopefully. So Do you see that as a problem? Is clinicians not finding it clinically relevant or lack the skills of actually looking at these papers to see if there are a lot of holes in the project? How do we overcome that gap, you think?
So I think one of the things that, at least in GI, I would say a couple of things have happened. Number one, about a year and a half ago, unlike what Piyush was talking about, which was open forum, our society decided to have more of a AI task force. And perhaps it reflects, the fact that we are still in our infancy and trying to figure out, how to move the field forward within our subspecialty. So we formed a task force, and we've done a couple of things. One is, some membership surveys to engage the interest as well as the knowledge of the clinicians, because, Anthony, as you're mentioning, we do feel that unless you involve clinicians in this process, I mean, it's going to fall flat, because otherwise it will be the data scientists running it and may not see the light at the end of the tunnel in getting into clinical acceptance. So that's one thing. The other thing we've done is followed the JAMA sort of like article review within GI. So, JAMA had that nice series of how to interpret articles on AI. And what we've done in GI is we've published a couple of articles, taking that same step, but making it more focused to gastroenterology and endoscopy. And, both for reviewers as well as for clinicians, is what's the terminology, what's the definition, what's the use case, what's the algorithm, is the outcome correctly measured? So we've done that. And then to an earlier discussion you had about data sets, our challenge is, not looking at EHRs, which there will be tons looking at Epic or Cerner, et cetera. But we're sort of trying to create an image and a video library, or sort of like an image net, trying to focus it on endoscopy that we are calling EndoNet. So that's the data set that we want to create as an unbiased source. The challenge we are running into is, how do you annotate a 1 gig video, which is one endoscopy. So it's just looking at those kinds of things. So we are, early on in this process, and our challenge is a little bit different. We are actually looking to collaborate with data scientists and trying to figure out how they can fit in within gastroenterology and endoscopy, and sort of like work with clinicians to move this thing forward.
Right. So we have about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you in 30 seconds. We'll probably have this meeting again next year around this time. What do you anticipate? What would you like to see happen in your subspecialty in this 1 year period? And we'll start with Shafi. We'll start with you.
I think the key words are the hype, the hope, and the reality, Anthony. And I think we're now seeing realistic uses of AI in the next 12 months. We'll see translation is the key. So I think that's kind of where we are in the next 12 months. The pandemic has accelerated change, helped us adopt technology much faster, relax the rules and regulations.
Hopefully
translation is the key.
Hopefully the pandemic has helped and will continue to help. Terry, 1 year time, what would you hope neurology would be excited about, we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the problem is no longer the engineering. I think, just as Shafi just said, the problem is identifying the problems. What are the targetable issues that can be solved with this class of information technologies? Because I think we have the power, the computational power, and the available data to answer questions, but we have to answer the meaningful questions.
Yeah, I think we need to be more vocal and to the data scientists that we actually have maybe different and better questions, right? Emre, how about in your area, OBGYN?
So it's going to be repetitive, but the bottom line is I just hope that this time next year we'll have a lot more interest in people in the field of AI and data science paying attention to OB. And also I'm going to do what I can to try to raise awareness within the field that this is out there, and start asking for help. We need our practitioners to start approaching AI researchers and experts to ask to collaborate.
Yeah, also I think political awareness helps. Amongst cardiologists, we formed an AI group now. So we have monthly meetings and just raising awareness, and hopefully get younger generation to get more interested in it too, right? Pratik, you're surging ahead with real-time endoscopy, use of AI. So where do you see next year taking you?
Yeah, so I think part is just what everyone's already said would be, required in the year. What I'd like to just add is, working with FDA and the regulatory agencies. I mean, that is, at least in GI, with some of these computer vision aids that we are having, it's been challenging because it's a new field for everyone, including them. And, collaboration with them to help move this thing forward so that it doesn't take years for a device to get FDA approval before we can see it in the clinical setting. To me, I mean, I'd just like to add that as something I'd like to see happen over the next year, not just for GI, but I think for all specialties.
To their credit, though, I think they've pivoted several times in the last couple of years because it's an exponential curve, right? And they have a linear trajectory. It's not a good match. Piyush, my friend, what do you think for anesthesia ICU sector? You're going to be AI will replace all of you guys in the next year or so, you think?
No, as you know, the ones who adopt AI are more likely to replace the ones who don't, as we have talked about previously. But I think we have hit a quantum threshold in terms of engagement. What we need to do is have more resources available to enhance the knowledge and foster collaboration. That's what I would like to see, so that it moves to the next level.
Yeah. Shervin, what do you think? You headed the administrative track. I think healthcare executives are putting in some simple tools like robotic process automation. Do you think it's going to keep going, or do you think it's going to get fatigued, that whole effort?
Yeah, I think in the next year or so, it's in my view, it's important to have a realistic expectation, because many of the large organizations are, focusing on self-serve platforms for their, employees and clinicians. But the point is, going from a lot of protocols and processes that are highly manual to self-serve, we probably have to identify an intermediate approach that is achievable, that is kind of a combination of AI, real-time analytics, and human, to sort of deliver value. So it's more of a human-guided solutions in a year that is bringing a significant impact. And one last point, back to your point, Anthony, about the need for clinicians to be highly involved. I fully agree with that. But at the same time, to scale innovation, we need to have a balance of the right skill sets. It's a UI, UX, it's QA. Data scientists are just, covering component of it, but a balanced team is significant to the success of the solution, in my opinion.
I think, Alfonso, did you want to chime in since you're already here? What do you see in the next year in healthcare and AI? Somehow we're not hearing you. Ironically, from an engineer. While he's getting ready to say his last words, I feel like, yes, it would be great for the clinicians to get involved. And okay, go ahead, Alfonso. Are you here with us now?
I don't know. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Perfect. It's the nice thing about being the one engineer that can't seem to get the sound up and running right. So actually, I think that's actually a really important point in terms of what is expected in the next year. And getting projects up and running, and as we're seeing now, that's actually the key thing. Like, for example, a few years ago, we were all discussing what was coming. The interesting thing about at least the session that Shervin was running with Bill and Eric and myself is that the number of projects that are actually running is actually quite significant. And that's really the key thing, is getting these things up and running and getting some feedback from clinical workflows to make sure that they, bring in some actual actionable, workflows into the clinical setting. So I think that's the most exciting thing as to what's going to be happening in the next year.
Well, I'm hoping to see in this 1 year, in I think what is going to be a 10 to 25 year journey for us to really look back and say, wow, that was amazing that this started and look what we've accomplished, is to have a closer partnership with our data scientist colleagues in guiding them to the right questions, the right projects, the right data sets. I feel like some of that resource is being inefficient right now. And I think we're going to head into a decade of, in a way, I don't want to be a pessimist, but it's going to be harder work to get dividends because we're now going into the decision-making processes. The image areas, I think, are relatively low-hanging fruit for us in the first 5 years. I think the next tier of projects will be harder because we haven't even talked much the last couple of days about the fuzzy nature of biomedical signals and therapeutic interventions. It's very fuzzy. It's not dichotomous or categorical like the image data. So it's going to be harder and harder to see results too. So, but I do think that if we keep our eyes on the prize 10, 25 years from now, we'll keep marching forward, and it's going to be an amazing legacy that we can all leave behind. So with that, thank you everybody for all your hard work and your dedication for our attendees. And even if we inspire one young person to say, this is what I want to do, I think it's well worth the couple of days that we spent here. So I'll give the virtual platform back to Alexis.